Welcome to the Indie Wine Podcast. My name is Matt Wood, and this is episode 82. Today I'm talking with Bradford Taylor of Ordinaire and Diversey wines. We discuss how Ordinaire came to be, its early days of being run super natty, in Bradford's words, some of the challenges that made it double down on natural wine, where the shop fits into the natural wine scene, and much more. A reminder that I have a Patreon at patreon.com/indiewinepodcast. The link is in the show notes also. If you're enjoying the podcast, any amount to help me keep telling wine stories ad-free and available for everyone is appreciated. It's all run independent. Telling a friend or sharing on social media are great ways to help out too. Here we go. Yeah, I guess maybe we could start kind of at the beginning. What was your kind of entryway into wine or wine appreciation?
Yeah. I grew up in a family that was religious and did not drink. So there wasn't really any family history there. But maybe because of that, was driven to find, wine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I graduated from undergrad in 2007, and my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, Nicole, we moved to France. I've been going to France off and on for academic work. And so I'd kind of become friends with someone who owned a bookstore. And so after I graduated, we moved there, and I worked at a bookshop and did some tutoring. She was a nanny, and kind of got into cooking at home and drinking wine with lunch and dinner.
Okay.
Anytime we could. And my my schedule at the bookstore was really interesting because it was open from noon till midnight every day, and I worked the late shift. So I would work from basically 5 till 1.
Sure.
So I didn't have a lot of time to go out at night, and so we ended up cooking a lot of lunches together.
Okay.
And kind of started to teach myself how to cook. We didn't have a lot of money, so we'd go to restaurants every once in a while and try to pick up techniques and then do them at home. When I was out, I loved shopping, going to the market, and then finding a little wine shop. I was just kind of obsessed with the culture of food consumption in France. It became it really spoke to me. I was young at this time. I was I don't know, 20, 21, I guess. And there were these certain wine shops that were also bars, and the vibes at those bars in Paris were just so great. I couldn't really afford to hang out there that much. I'd save up, buy one bottle, take it home, or go and have a glass, but the vibes just really spoke to me. There was the people that hung out there were sort of ratty, kind of punk vibe. It's just didn't seem like what I thought wine was.
Wasn't a snooty wine experience.
None of that. There was none of that. And not that I really had that experience beforehand, but just in your mind, you think about wine being that way. And this just wasn't that. I was oh, this is cool, And so whenever I had money and time, those were the places I would hang out. And then we moved back to the United States. Nicole started going to school to get her public health degree at Yale, and I moved back to New York. I didn't want to live in New Haven, so I lived in New York. I got a job working at Travel and Leisure magazine, doing copy editing and research. And my my little cubicle was right beside Ray Isles' office. He's
Nice.
the writer for Food and Wine. They shared offices in the American Express building by Bryant Park. And he would always leave samples out of his door. And and they were for anyone to take. And I would just take them. And I would go back to Brooklyn with my roommates, and we would drink these wines. And, I'd host little dinners, I'd cook, and we'd taste all the wines. We'd write notes about them. And I just started to get hooked on wine. At that time, it was it definitely wasn't natural wine, but I was just kind of tasting whatever I could, and started to read a lot about I was on all the Robert Parker bulletin boards back then, and basically I'd get all my work done for travel and leisure in the first
Yeah.
like 90 minutes of the day,
Okay.
and then I just read about wine.
What kind of time frame or time period
So
is
this was
this?
2008,
Okay. It's probably
and
a lot of Pinot Noirs and
yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah. I mean, I
Probably
forget.
tasting.
I forget a lot of the wines. I mean, a lot of them
Yeah.
weren't. I mean, a lot of them were like hard to drink. I remember.
Sure.
I remember not drinking a lot of the wines, but tasting them and just being like, "Oof," it's like, yeah, they didn't really like agree with my body in the ways that French wines did. But I still didn't have in my head like the natural versus conventional or classic dichotomy. That just wasn't. I was like, just wine culture in America is different than French culture. And so then I got the financial crisis occurred. I got fired. I still had to pay for my lease. Ended up becoming a barista and like an art mover and just trying to like scrape by in New York. And I was like, this sucks. I'm going to apply to grad school. So I got into Berkeley and yeah, moved out here the next year and did the bi-coastal thing with Nicole, which sucked. Thankfully, she got into UCSF the next year. So she came out here for med school and joined me.
That's great.
Which was great. Yeah, so when we were living out here, just kind of continued the wine thing and fell in love with like the Chez Panisse Orbit, Kermit Lynch. And I was like, okay. I was like, I reckon these wines. I was like, oh, I recognize these wines. These are the wines I was drinking in France. I was like, huh. And I started to like kind of nerd out on the wines I found. I think it was like Solano Cellars had an online store in which they did this really funny thing where they would post like the entire farm wines inventory on their website as if they had it in stock. So it's like all the wines from Olivier Lemasson, like Dardribot, Puzelat, like all these wines. And I was like, oh my goodness. So I started ordering them and they were like, they'll be here in like 3 days. And I realized what they were doing is like, they would receive the order, then they would call Kevin, who's the importer.
Yeah.
And then they were like, we need 3 bottles of this, 2 bottles of this, and then I would go and pick them up.
Yeah.
And so I started drinking, natural wine again. I was like, oh, this is, these are my wines. These are the producers I like. And I started putting things together. And then, but was mostly a student, I was working and teaching at Berkeley, making graduate student money. Didn't have tons of income, for like, we would go to Chez Panisse Cafe once a year. That was like our big thing.
Up and splurge.
And yeah, so I remember my dad came out to visit in, I want to say 2011. And I was living in Oakland at the time and we were getting dinner ready. All this time I had been cooking a lot. Like I had not lost the cooking, but I was just cooking all the time, and loved, just like French technique, but with like California ingredients. I just like loved living here, going to the market, reading Chez Panisse cookbooks, yada, yada, yada. And we got in the car because we needed to get a bottle of wine and we like get out on the 580 and just sit in traffic for like ever trying to get to Kermit Lynch.
Right. That's a journey.
And
the best
my
of
dad
times.
is like, he's like, isn't there like any place closer you can get a bottle of wine? I was like, well, no, it's like Trader Joe's and Whole Foods, but like, you can't get wine from there. I was like, you have to drive to Kermit Lynch. He's like, you would just think there would be a place in Oakland that would, you could go and get a good bottle of wine. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. He's like, why don't you, did you ever consider opening up a shop? I was like, no. But then it just like stuck in my head. And yeah. And then I just couldn't get out of my head. And I ended up finding a spot on Grand Avenue, which is kind of where Nicole and I would hang out. Whenever we would go to a restaurant, that's where it was. And yeah, signed a lease and that was that. And that's kind of how I got into wine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it took a year to build the shop. I did it with a buddy, Cypress. So we did all the work. It was it was a blinds store, and then like a gym, like a carpeted gym.
Okay.
So it was just
Funny.
blank
Yeah.
space. So yeah, spent all my time building Ordinaire in between teaching classes and trying to write my prospectus and so doing the Berkeley thing and that, and then we had our first, and then Nicole got pregnant and had Francisco, my oldest, just around the same time that Ordinaire opened.
Okay.
So kind of all at once. So yeah,
Sounds like an exciting time.
yeah. Totally exciting time. Yeah. So much. Yes. Just so much was going on. So yeah.
And Ordinaire wasn't the original name, right?
Oh yeah. So it was originally called the Red Whale. I have a tattoo on my chest here of a whale.
Oh.
And yeah, for a couple of reasons. It's a reference to Moby Dick, the white whale, which is the novel that inspired me to study literature. And I just changed it to red to kind of sound like red wine. And then also there's a bar in Paris called Le Baron Rouge, which doesn't really serve natural wine, but they serve wine out of like, you can go there with like jugs and fill up wine.
Okay.
And Nicole and I used to go there, and like, it's just really cold, kind of damp space. You go there at like 8 a.m. and there'd be a bunch of people like drinking aligoté and eating oysters and going to the market. And I was like, that's what I want.
Yeah.
That's what I want Ordinaire to be, or the Red Whale to be. So La Baleine Rouge sounds like Le Baron Rouge. So it was this kind of like insider jeu de mots for that no one would get, I guess, unless I explained it to them.
Yeah.
But for me, that was important. And then I got a cease and desist like a month before we were supposed to open.
Okay.
And changed the name to Ordinaire. Thank goodness. Much better name.
You touched on it for a second there, but what did you envision the shop would be when you were opening?
Yeah. So I still hadn't really, like, natural wine hadn't like crystallized as like the thing that was important for me. What for me was important was to have a shop and a bar that fostered like a connection between the customer and the winemaker.
Okay.
And that really built like a community around just like casually drinking wine, that, and that just connected producer and customer. Because that's what I felt, that energy is what I felt when I was in France. I was like, oh, they're serving like local wines, and producers hang out in these places. It seems to be aligned with that more like rustic farming culture, right? It wasn't this like detached service model that had no connection with the farm that was producing the wine. It seemed like more integrated and imminent to the service model. And so for that reason, I wanted to open something that was really focused on California wine. But in the process of like trying to discover California wines that I wanted to carry, I realized that not a lot of people were making the kind of wines I wanted to make, or that I wanted to sell.
Yeah.
So there were some. There was like Kevin Kelly was making wine. I visited one of the first people I visited. Hank, Gideon, Tony Katuri, and some others. But it was kind of, that was in 2011, 2012 when I was first starting to try to like find out what was happening in California. And I just thought there was going to be so much more that I didn't know. And I was like, oh, wait, I kind of know most of what's going on here.
Yeah, there's probably a dozen at that time, using even maybe expanding the circle a little bit, even maybe a dozen
totally.
or 10.
Right. And so then I kind of had to like reframe my expectations for the shop. Because I thought it was going to be like 80% California and then just kind of fill in with Europe, like the spots I couldn't fill, or maybe there's some really important producers that I really wanted to have from Europe.
Sure.
So anyway, that happened. We opened, and I had never worked a day of service in my life.
Okay.
and neither had anyone else that was helping me. They were all grad students.
Okay.
And so we really didn't know what we were doing. We didn't have a cash till. We didn't have a way. I mean, it was just like, it was pretty natty.
Yeah.
Yeah. And luckily, there were a number of importers and distributors that were way more knowledgeable than me that came into the shop and like kind of recognized a kindred spirit. And they're like, all right, we see what you want to be doing here. And like, we're going to help you like realize that pretty much. And I was really open to it. I was open to learn. I was open to anything. And excited, I was super excited to learn. And so, yeah, there were some key figures early on. I mean, Kevin Clancy from Farm was a big influence. And when he found out who I was, he's like, "Oh, you were the guy that was ordering all the Limousin." He's like, "That's you." And Chris Scanlon, who was working for Amy Atwood at the time and brought in all the Jenny and Francois stuff and the Zev Rovine stuff, kind of had a really like heavy-handed approach. He's like, "You should get this wine. You should get this wine." And as the labels like came into the shop, I was like, "Oh, that wine." I was like, and these were like, it kind of like backfilled. And I was like, "Oh, these were all the wines I was drinking in France." But I just hadn't like made that connection.
Sure.
So then I started to like build this knowledge of natural wine. I started like reading wine terroirs, I just started like really becoming like going deep.
Yeah. Connecting all the dots.
Exactly.
Kind of.
Yeah. And then this funny thing happened where a wine shop opened down the road from me called Bay Grape. And I was in like complete panic. I was like, what? Like I spent all this time like working to try to like, open this shop. It took me so long. It was like, and they opened like right by my apartment. Like I lived like a half mile from the shop, and they opened like right beside it. And I was so worried that, because they were like professionals, they knew what they were doing, they like had all this like industry knowledge, and I was just like, man, we are fucked. and I had recently become really close buddies with Josh Eubank, who is the importer at Percy Selections. And he had called me, just like cold called the shop maybe like 2 weeks after we had opened. And he was like, "Hey, I'm walking around, I have some wines open, can kind of come and taste." And he came and, poured some samples. I purchased the wines and learned that he had also gone to Berkeley, studied sociology, also was like interested in sort of like radical political movements, and was a really good cook and liked to drink wine. So he had me over for dinner, met his wife, and like we just kind of hit it off and remain like best friends to this day. But at the time, he knew more than I did about natural wine. And I remember complaining to him about Bay Grape and about how worried I was about it. And he's like, "Do they sell natural wine?" I was like, "Well, not really." And at the time I served mostly natural wine, but had a little bit of everything. And he was just like, "This is just an opportunity to become more radical." And I was like, "Okay." He's like, "This is the kind of wine you and I drink. It's what you believe in." He was like, "Just become more radical." And I was like, okay, I just like took the advice.
Yeah.
And then once I did that, it felt so right. And I was like, "Oh, this is what I've been kind of without knowing it, what I've been wanting to do this whole time." And it just all kind of like clicked.
Yeah, just gave it the chance to like kind of cement the outlook, I guess, of the shop.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I just became a lot more hardcore in my buying, stopped buying wines with chemicals in them. And yeah. And in terms of the California producers, this interesting thing happened where I stopped buying a lot of wines that I had been purchasing. People were like, "What's that?" And I was like, "Well, you filter, or, you pitch yeast, or, you sulfur it mallow, and then you put another 50 part." I was like, "So we're just not going to buy those wines anymore." And then some winemakers were like, "Okay." And then some of them were like, "Oh, well, they're like, we could use less, we don't have to put sulfites in this wine. We could do a keg of wine where we don't add anything and like it could just be for you. So it was interesting. Like some of the winemakers were like, well, if we know that there's a market, we know if you want this, we'll make it this way.
Okay.
And so that started kind of an interesting conversation, which evolved into Brewmare eventually. That kind of interaction of like, this is what we do. If you want to be a part of this, this is the kind of the expectations for how the wine should be made if we're going to carry it. So it made for a really interesting dialogue in those early days, where I feel like hopefully it felt kind of empowering for smaller producers to take more risks, knowing that we would commit to the wines. Kind of, whereas maybe they had felt like there wouldn't be they were maybe more timid just because there wasn't going to be a market for a wine that had, some VA or was unfiltered or whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What are some of the other things that kind of jump out to you about those early days of the shop, or like, how did you want to run? How did you want to run it, I guess, as a business? We were talking before we started recording, but like now you guys do, field trips, and I know for a while it was kind of a more analog experience, sort of, phone line, but no like social media or things like that. What were some of those ideas in your head that how you wanted to run the shop in the early days?
Yeah, I would say I didn't have very clear ideas.
Okay.
Like I was just there all the time, so I was like, we're just going to try to sell wine to people, and do it as cheaply as we can. That was always really important to me. I also, because I had never worked in the industry, I didn't know how markups worked.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. There's a pretty standard like model. And so, and I had come from France where glasses of wine at the Vervolet at the time were like, 5-6 euros. And so in my mind, I was like, you want to come to get a glass of wine and it should be, $7-8. So we had a lot of customers early on because they were like, oh, you can get a $7 glass of wine here. And yeah, so making it cheap was really important to me, I guess. When I would go and I would see the markups, like once I understood how the markups were working, I was just like, what? It's like, why do people do this? Like it just made no sense to me that they were making that much profit on wine, especially when the winemakers obviously weren't making that profit. Like it just seemed like way over the top to me, and I didn't understand the necessity of it, apart from just like making more profit, I guess. But in terms of like running your business and paying your employees well, it just didn't seem necessary to me. And so keeping it cheap and keeping it accessible was really important. Keeping it casual. And yeah, I mean, then the other dimension that has its own kind of history is making the shop really welcoming to people of all ages. So people can bring their kids there. That was really important to me. It influenced a lot of my kind of like tough decisions in terms of licensing. I had to do a lot of extra work in order to get that. Like I had to build a kitchen pretty much in order to get a restaurant license so that kids could come in.
Got it.
But I'm so happy I did that. Because that was another thing that I always loved about Europe, is that there didn't seem to be this like huge generational divide in how people consume wine and food. It seemed a lot more integrated. And I think that still carries through at Ordinaire, that it's, I mean, yeah, adults hang out there, but it's very welcoming to families and to older people and to younger people. It's like, well, it's comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess the other thing is like, it was always very, I was simultaneously conceptualizing a dissertation that was about taste's ability to like, play a role in the formation of like alternative communities. That's a kind of slightly abstract way to put it, but I guess that makes the point. Like, there was something very concrete, like putting wine in people's glasses for cheap. But for me, it's always been quite conceptual and abstract, like what wine makes possible, and what taste makes possible as like a sense and as a faculty. So that's just always in my mind, like taste in like the German idealism, like tradition is like from Kant, right? It's an ability, right? It's a faculty that allows us to conceptualize the universal, right? So like when our experience of beauty, when we experience beauty, we experience it as if everyone else in the world also finds it beautiful. And I just find that concept like really compelling. And I find, wine a really kind of like compelling material artifact in that discourse. And so I always kind of always have that in my mind when I think about like what Ordinaire is for. Right? There's something very particular about what we're doing, but there's always a vision towards something universal. And that can take many different forms. It can take the form of like solidarity, kind of like in like political terms, but it can also take the form of just like aesthetics, a way of thinking aesthetically about how we experience things in our everyday life. So, there's always been that kind of more abstract intellectual like backing to what we're up to.
Yeah, undercurrent there. Those early days also, what was kind of your average customer, or did you find it difficult to present some of these wines that maybe tastes, like you said, VA or maybe a little Brett, that like maybe people weren't used to, or were kind of outside the box for a lot of people?
Yeah. And I it was difficult. And I have realized over time that my impulse is to like not push customers, to sort of be like, oh, try this, like easy, this one's better. We'd have like something by the glass that would, if they didn't like this more radical wine, I could always like pour them this Zin, But I've had the good fortune to hire employees and managers that are not that way.
Okay.
And they have pushed me to be to make fewer concessions. And thank goodness. So like Quinn, who now, opens Psychic and runs Triste in LA right now, I hired him maybe about a year and a half after we opened. And he really helped me to kind of believe in what we were doing and believe in natural wine, and to be like, make the customer rise to the occasion. He's like, they're capable of it if you hold your ground, pretty much. And so, I was able, so he did that. And then, Josh has always been there to kind of like call my bullshit and to be like, yo, like keep it natty, So I've been, there's been hard times, but I'm also just like routinely impressed by the customer's ability to be open to different like flavors or different expressions, especially once they understand that like natural wine isn't reducible to like the components of flavor. Like once they understand that we're involved in like a more profound and wider like cultural project, their capacity to like be open to like wines that are unconventional in the way that they present themselves through taste is like, they can do it, and they love it. I think that's why a lot of people come to Ordinaire. So hard, but I've evolved a lot, and so have the customers. So that's what makes it fun.
How have you seen it change it's been about 13 years, I guess. And what's the evolution, I guess, that you've seen maybe in California natural wine as a whole, I guess, in that time? And I think probably the consumer is more educated and used to it. And I know that it's kind of a big question. There's been a lot of changes, I guess, and ups and downs. And the
it is a big question.
Probably expanded by 10 times the amount, maybe, or something like that. Or
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to answer
You
that
could take
question.
that as little pieces also.
Yeah.
It
I
doesn't.
mean, one way, just in the way that it's affected the buying. I mean, first I should say I don't really buy the wine at Ordinaire anymore. It's been Contin for a long time, and I can talk about how that all happened. But there's so many more options now.
Hmm.
It used to be if there was something vaguely natural being produced in California, we would buy it
Okay.
because there wasn't that much.
Hmm.
Now there's a lot, and so we can be choosy. And so, sometimes we buy them, sometimes we don't. There's some producers that we always carry, obviously. But yeah, it's nice, to be able to select in a way,
Yeah.
in a way that we weren't able to before. So that's changed. There's just more natural wine. And I would say that just comes with like its own problems. I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, I mean that in a way that it's opportunity to find like different solutions. So I guess it's an opportunity to find like new ways to be radical, right? Because I mean, for me, it's like, natural wine, right? It's a product, but it's also like a process. It's an attitude, right? It's a mode of comportment, right? That has to be constantly questioning like what's radical, because the opposite of natural wine for me is like conventional, right?
Hmm.
And so like becoming aware of when what we're doing has become conventional, right? When it becomes like reified
Okay.
as something that, right, is reproducible, right, and that's safe, right, and that is like,
Hmm.
however you want to put it, you could say abides by, market logic, right? Recognizing when there's that threat and then finding a way to become radical and subversive again.
Hmm.
So with the like growing, popularity of natural wine, right, it's easy to become complacent and to think natural wine's everywhere. Right? It's not, right?
Yeah.
If it's everywhere, it's not natural wine.
Hmm.
So that's a really abstract way of answering the question, like
Yeah.
what has changed. But I think
That's
maybe that's a structural way to think about the development of natural wine in California.
yeah. So what is I guess, an ordinary wine or an
Uh huh.
ordinary producer? Not
Mm-hmm.
a specific producer, but just in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. Uh, it's hard to find like a typical one. Yeah, how to answer that question. Um, I mean, the producers that I am drawn to,
And it
and
doesn't have to
and
be a specific producer. I guess just kind of the what seems to grab the ordinary,
yeah,
what type of wine seems to grab the ordinary spirit to you.
yeah, totally. There's something that happens when you drink natural wine that is, I don't know. There's different ways, I guess you could describe it, but I think one way could be like it's epiphanic, right? So it's right, it's an experience that's like unexpected and surprising.
Hmm.
And I think, yeah, when I drink with the staff or, or with Nicole or whatever, right, natural wine's that thing that's like it can frustrate, but also like expand your expectations
Mm.
about what wine can be.
Hmm.
And I'm amazed, I've been drinking natural wine for, I don't know, 13 years now, but like natural wine still does that to me.
Hmm.
And I think that the producers that we're drawn to are excited by that intrinsic quality of wine, right? Its
Hmm.
ability to do things that escape what we think is possible in, right? It's like, or let me reframe that, right? Natural wine as a process, right, describes the relationship between like a human and nature, right? And the attempt to sort of like mold nature into a product, right, that we can consume, right? And I think that what's cooler are those moments that kind of escape the like plan or the process, right? So when we can call it nature or call it something else, but something that escapes the ability for the human to do something that goes according to plan, right? It's like they have a plan, and the things that like diverge from that and come back and surprise us, I feel like, and then being excited about that as opposed to trying to control it or being afraid of it. I feel like those are the producers that we really love, right?
Yeah.
That are, yeah, excited by spontaneity, excited by like, they don't take those as faults. They don't think about them as mistakes, right? They think about them as moments of spontaneity that are, right, that characterize like what it means to be free, right, in a way. So, yeah, that's again like pretty abstract, but to try to describe what an ordinary producer is, I feel like you kind of have to be a little abstract, I guess. Yeah.
No,
So,
that's
yeah.
That's fine. One thing I've always found interesting about the shop is I think you tend to carry a larger selection of a producer's portfolio,
Yep.
where you might have, say, 5 wines by a single producer, or a lot of shops will have
Yep.
sort of the token
Yep.
wine by that producer.
Yep.
What's the thought process behind that?
Yeah. I mean, mostly just that, right? I mean, we know these producers, most of them, and we believe in them, and we believe in supporting them. And yeah, so we almost don't think of ourselves as like as carrying wines, but like supporting these like different artisans in a way. And sometimes if they have a wine that's like a little hard or a little weird, like it's important to us to still buy it and like do the work to sell it. Because we know that they did the work to produce it. So yeah, it's about keeping that relationship vital. Yeah, respecting their work. And then also translating that to the customer and saying like, this isn't like some commodity that's been like produced out of nothing, right? This was made by a human, and their labor is congealed in this commodity. It's like, so like reminding people that these are made by hands, by people that, have artistic ideas, right? That spend their time, like cleaning, washing, farming, yeah. So having the full range of wines, I feel like translates that in a very like concrete way to the customer as well.
Yeah, I've talked to more than one producer. I guess Hank kind of was the first one I heard say it, but his outlook, I think, on La Clarine was like a art project with commercial leanings, I think, was a quote of his early on, which I think he stands by still. Oh, thank you.
This is really low, and it's only, I think it's like 3% alcohol. So
Okay.
it's
what was it?
apple piquette.
Okay.
From
Wonderful.
Wisconsin.
Oh.
Yeah, just that like the human element behind the wine. Yeah, Marx has this line in his early manuscripts where he talks about it's like one of my favorite quotations from him, where he says, the cultivation of the 5 senses is the work of all previous history. And then he writes about it in this more objective dimension, and he talks about the relationship between humans and nature is the work of humanizing nature. And so when our senses are fully enriched and able to be used, right, what we're experiencing is humanized nature. And I think about natural wine that way. So you could call it natural wine, or you could call it human wine. And it's almost the same way. It's 2 ways of describing the same thing. Yeah.
I've never heard that quote, but it's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, really interesting. Well, you'd kind of brought it up with local producers, California producers, and it seems like the shop is really intertwined with a lot of them. You've had multiple producers working at the shop,
Yep.
I guess,
Yeah,
either
yeah.
before they started making wine or after they started making wine.
Yeah, definitely.
Does that just kind of come naturally, I guess,
Yeah.
just
Well,
as part of the community? And
it does. Yeah, it comes naturally. I mean, pretty early on, the shop became like a hangout for a lot of winemakers, and distributors and importers. People would just like they would just like show up at the bar, or like distributors would come. They would like pour their samples, and then they would just hang out there.
yeah.
And it's interesting, when I was still doing the buying, I went like hardcore European. I was just like, there was just a time where I was just like no longer interested in buying California wine. I just kind of became exhausted by it. I was like, and I started traveling more to Europe. I started traveling more with Josh, visiting all his producers. And part of me just like lost interest in that original vision. And it was Quentin who kind of revived it in a way. He's so excited about California wine in a way that I had kind of lost.
Okay.
And I'm so thankful that he was just, he kind of was like, no, this is really special. And he's done a lot to really foster relationships with local winemakers, and kind of keep that alive, and then like make it even more, kind of even expand it. So we have more California wines now than ever, which is awesome. In terms of the winemakers that have worked there, Diego, obviously, he was the first to really, commit to it, which was amazing. And then, now Daniel and Michelle from Under the Table are doing it as well. They have amazing wines. That was just like the vision from the beginning, was to like not have that separation, to like bring the winemaker into that space. So it's amazing that it's happened. It has not been on purpose. It just kind of happened organically. And we used to do these like, we did a tasting every Saturday for like the first, I don't know how many years. And it always had to be either the winemaker or the importer that was pouring the wines.
Okay.
So we had so many winemakers come into the shop for that reason. And we would always buy their full lineup of wines. So that it was good for them. It was good for us. And it was just a way for customers to put a face behind the bottles. That's actually how Daniel and Michelle got to know the shop, is that they were like loyal customers. That they turned 21 and started coming to tastings. They would just come to every single tasting.
Okay.
And now they work there. So
Yeah.
And now they make their own wine. So
Yeah. I really enjoy their wines.
Yeah, they're great.
Their kind of take on some of the grapes that they use.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool. I mean, they represent for me this really cool evolution in California natural wine, which is a return to more traditional styles, both in a European sense, but also in a California sense, like ripe, extracted, structured wines.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there was this time where people like started to associate natural wine with a style as opposed to like a process or an ethic. And their wines are like this really nice corrective to that, which is like, no, it doesn't mean that you're co-fermenting and direct pressing and doing a blend, to make these like iridescent ruby wines. It's like, no, you're making wine without chemicals. That's what natural wine is,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no,
it's great. And I crave those kinds of like more classic wines. So it's nice to have them around.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of times at tastings, their wines kind of stand out because of that, like maybe a little more heavily extracted Malbec, hearty,
exactly.
15% red wine, but it's like it's kind of there on its own terms. Like it's a well done wine, well thought out, intentionally made.
Yeah, and it has that natty like energy to it. It still feels good in your body.
Yeah.
So,
what about Premier?
Brumaire. Yeah, so Brumaire had like a little prehistory. Josh and I wanted to throw a party with kind of the natural wine bars around. So at the time, Ordinaire, Punchdown, Terroir, and Ruby, and there was and Vineyard Gate.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And because it was always kind of important to me that there was like not really like a competition between the places, we're like, there's so few people doing natural wine. It's like, let's be together on this.
Yeah.
And like DC and Lisa were like just amazing, like just their camaraderie the whole time. So I mentioned, I didn't even know they were there when I signed the lease for Ordinaire.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I would never go out to drink wine.
Yeah.
And they were there in downtown Oakland. I had no idea until I'd actually signed the lease. Someone's like, oh, yeah, there's a natural wine spot in downtown. I was like, no, there's not. And then I went and I was like, holy shit. And then they unfortunately had to close. They closed right as I opened, which was just a crazy timing. But
Yeah.
so anyway, we wanted to host a party called the Five Families. And we went on Treasure Island. There was a winery out there where Chris Scanlon was making wine. And we bought a pig and invited a bunch of people. And basically it was just like, everyone bring wine and we'll cook food. And it'd just be a free party. And it was super fun. And after we had done that, we realized we're like, oh, that was kind of like a fair. Like it wasn't that much different. I mean, because tons of winemakers came and poured their wines.
Yeah.
And so we were like, well, maybe we should, invite some Europeans next year and like make it a thing. So yeah, we started planning that. And what year would that have been? I forget when the first Brumaire is. Gosh, 10 years or 10 years ago. So whenever that is.
Yeah.
2015.
Yeah, 15, 16.
Yeah. So yeah, we were going to host it in Chrissy Field out there. It's just a place that Josh loves to barbecue. So we were like, oh yeah, let's like do a little amphitheater.
Yeah.
And as the day got closer, we realized that it was going to be raining. And I was like, oh fuck, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
And then the city contacted us because they somehow caught wind that we were like selling tickets and you're not allowed to do that.
Okay.
And they're like, we're going to refund you the money and you can't do it here.
Okay. Yeah.
Which
Not
was
the call
great.
you want.
Yeah. but we had to change it anyway. I'm like glad that they kind of like kicked us in the butt because otherwise we may have tried to throw a fair in the rain and that would have been a disaster. So we were like, fuck, what are we going to do? And so I called Adam Hatch, who was one of the owners at Starline Social Club. And I was like, we have this fair. We have all these people that have tickets. I was like, is your ballroom open? And he was like, sure, man. So it's just the best. And so we just did a little, pivot. And yeah, the first year was really chill. We just like, I forget who came, but yeah, a mix of Europeans and Californians. The idea was to have kind of half and half. Californians and Europeans in order to like start a conversation between what people are doing out here and what people are doing over there. And Josh and I cooked the food, made tacos. And yeah, it's great. And yeah, we just decided to do it again. And each year it just kind of got a little more built out. We became a little bit more rigid in our requirements in terms of what people can or can't put in their wines. And yeah, that's kind of how all that started.
Was that rigidity? Was that just there was kind of more and more producers that you're able to pick from?
I think maybe that helped that we were able to have more people to choose from. But I think it was also just I think it was Josh and I, and the other planners. I mean, Quinn was helping us at the time and Matt, just a growing sense that we wanted to be more kind of ideological,
Okay.
and that if Brumaire was going to be like have an identity, that we needed to like be clear about what it was. And that if other people wanted to host other fairs, that's awesome. They can, there's plenty, you know, and now there are a lot more fairs. Yeah, because we were like, we don't want to be we don't want to turn into like raw wine, which there's good things and bad things about it. But we were like, we just don't want to go down that route where we're like all things to all people. Like, let's just, and, you know, and we go to the fairs in France, so we know it's possible to host a really strict fair that's very clear about what they are.
Yeah.
So we're like, let's just do that. So yeah. And that's one of my least favorite things to do, is to tell people they can't come to Brumaire. But yeah, that's become my job over the years.
Okay.
Or one of my jobs.
Yeah. So I guess just keep pushing sort of and refining it, because it seems like there's like a real clear through line, I feel like, running through a lot of the producers, sort of the current crop of them.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of them are people that we know, and that we like, and that make wines that we like to drink. And yeah, and they have, you know, and they're also people that, like, you know, yeah, we like them. They like to party. They're, you know, there's a certain like vibe at Brumaire that we also are trying to, you know, we kind of think of it as like this like huge dinner party in a way.
Yeah.
So we don't, I mean, we always make sure to like net out at zero maximum. We usually lose money on it. And 'cause we really try to think of it as like it's like a cultural service that we're performing for the Bay Area. And for the winemakers that come, you know, and they get to have a little vacation and, you know, do a little like tour of California. But yeah, it's like a dinner party, and we host it for the same reasons that you would have people over for dinner, like not to make money or, you know, there's not much of a purpose beyond just like doing it, you know, like having fun together. Yeah. And I think that's why people like it so much, is like, you're like, oh, what is this for? It's not for anything. It's just like for us, like, this is what it means to be human, you know, is to like get together and eat and drink together. Like, that's the end goal, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's great. Doesn't need to have another purpose.
Yeah, it really doesn't. And I think we've realized that more and more over time, that it doesn't. I think early on we were like, oh, this is to like push natural wine forward in California, or like, you know, or whatever, name some other goal. But over time we've just been like, oh, actually it is what it is. It's a way to get together, and, you know, it's like going to a wedding or, you know, or something, you know, it's like a reunion each year.
Yeah, and it's you have those the European winemakers flying over, and some producers from other states also, and ciders and
yeah. So this
like that.
Tony and Elise make this wine, and they're from Wisconsin, and they come and pour their wines, and and winemakers really like it too, because they just kind of like leech off that energy. You know, domestic producers love it because they get to like drink wine with some of their idols in Europe. Yeah. And then also the Europeans love it because they just like love the energy that the Bay Area has for their wines, and just for wine in general. Like, they really dig it.
Yeah.
So I'm always so surprised when someone's like, yeah, I'll be there this year, you know, and I'm like, wow, like, you're going to fly all the way to California to come and pour wine at a fair? And they're like, fuck yeah. I'm like, all right, thanks. You know, it feels good.
Yeah, it's got to feel good, I'm sure.
Yeah.
How has the shop changed in the 13 years or so since it's open? I mean, you've alluded to a couple times, like, maybe not buying the wines as much. Yeah. And I guess your involvement, or just kind of how it runs
my
day to
involvement
day,
has changed a lot. And some of that, wasn't by choice. I mean, my wife's a doctor, and she got placed in a residency program in Chicago. So we had to move there in 2016. So I've been running the shop for 3 years and working there full time. And so we found out on March 18th, which I remember that day because my daughter Lupe was born And and then an hour after she was born, we found out that that we had to move to Chicago in June. In
Wow.
in less
Everything
than
kind
3
of
months.
happens at once
Yeah.
in your
And then
in your
that
life,
night
it
we were
feels like.
hosting a party at the shop with Olivier Lemesson and Thierry Pouzelat and Rene Moss and I think Jules Dresner was there and maybe some other people from LDM.
Okay.
I think Denise was there. And yeah, I was in like total shock. I was just, having a child, it's like, there's so much emotion, and then learning I was going to have to move, and I was just like in this like crazy state. I remember I like walked down to the shop that evening, even though Lupe had just been born, and I was like talking to Olivier, and he's like, "What's up?" We're like in the back alley smoking. He's like, "Well, what's going on?" I was like, "I've just had a crazy day." He's like, "My daughter was born, and I found out that I have to move to Chicago in like 2 months." And he was just like, "Yeah, that's a lot, man." He's like, "It's gonna be," he was basically just like, "It's okay," I was like, "Yeah, I guess so." I don't know. So yeah, we moved to Chicago, and Quentin, who had become a friend and was working at the shop, had worked at Vervolet in Paris. Actually, when I was living in Paris, he was working there, but we didn't know each other. But I had recognized him because he had these huge dreadlocks. And I was like, oh, that's the dreadlock guy from the Natty Wine scene in Paris. And he kind of took over. I was like, so Quinn was still working there too. So it was Quinn. So Quinn kind of took over and Quentin was working. But then it became obvious to Quinn and Quentin that like Quentin was going to be the one that was like buying the wines. And Quinn was going to go and open up Psychic. So after they worked together for a little bit, well, there's a whole other story. Oh my gosh, I'm not even telling this story correctly. What actually happened was Quinn had told me he was going to go to LA. I was like, okay, shit, I got to find someone to replace me. So Josh, my buddy, was like, you should hire Diego. And I was like, who's Diego? He's like, he ran this great place in Rhode Island called Aho y Flan. He's a great cook. He knows how to run a bar, loves natural wine. I was like, okay. I've never met this person. Josh was like, just trust me. He's awesome. So I flew Diego out here to meet him. And we like went sailing and I was basically like, do you want to move to California and run this bar? And he was like, okay, sure. He just moved out here. I was curious. I don't know if you guys talked about that on your podcast, but yeah, he just moved out here. And yeah, that dynamic I was describing between Quinn and Quentin is actually between Diego and Quentin. So Diego was originally the manager, and then Quentin kind of became the manager, and then Diego left and started doing his wine thing more full time. He just would work a few shifts. And Quentin took over the buying, and I tried to kind of be involved. I would fly out here a bunch, but I still did all the bookkeeping and all that. But Quentin just kind of like took over. And he's like better at buying wine. He knows more about wine than I do, and he's better at buying than I am, honestly. And it's just kind of like worked out really well. I have tons of respect for him. He's like work ethic and yeah, his ability to taste wine and remember it's amazing. Yeah, I got really, really lucky.
Yeah.
That he kind of stepped up and has run the place so passionately. So when I moved back to California, I kind of envisioned that I would reintegrate into Ordinaire. And it kind of became, this will be funny to say on your podcast because I haven't really talked to my staff about it, but just from a personal point, it kind of became obvious to me that like I wasn't super necessary there.
Okay.
And it was really hard for me to come to terms with that because it was such an important part of my life.
Sure.
Opening Ordinaire and then leaving it was so traumatic for me. And then to come back and feel alienated from it was like pretty emotionally raw for me. And just to realize that like I was just kind of like a boss that was like distanced from it all.
Okay.
You know, like I was just like running payroll and like filing taxes and making sure that like the numbers worked, which is just like not who I am. And so I have been less involved than I thought I would be, and it's been an interesting learning process for me personally. And I've just taken that time to focus more on my kids and try to finish writing my dissertation, and then just support the shop in whatever way they need me. A lot of that's just like going on field trips with the staff and partying and making sure they're happy and but yeah, they're really good at their job, and so I kind of try to stay out of the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes it takes something to, I guess, know when to step back or stay out of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
way
Yeah.
also. But that sounds like it could be a tough thing, especially at the beginning
Yeah.
of it, or once
Yeah.
with the realization. But
Yeah. I mean, when I lived in Chicago, I opened up another wine shop,
right.
Diversey. Yeah, opened that with two buddies and worked there pretty full time. But then COVID hit, and that changed a lot. And I ended up not being, I'd homeschool my kids, so I didn't end up going into the shop. The people that were working there wanted to work all the time, and there was all these like weird like COVID like it was just weird times. And after COVID, I just never picked up shifts again there.
Okay.
So kind of in a similar way, kind of became like distanced from the everyday workings of the shop. And it's like, whenever I tell people this, or I'm like, yeah, I own this bar and I own this shop, and I don't really work there. They're like, that's awesome, man. They're like, you figured it out. And there's really nothing someone can say to me that annoys me more than that. I'm just like, honestly, it is, I don't like it. Like yeah, it's not a good feeling to feel distanced from the thing that you helped create. So I'm after I finish writing, I'd really like to figure out a way to become like more integrated or reintegrate back into both of the businesses. Right now I'm just in a stage where I need to kind of be a little withdrawn to focus on other stuff. But yeah, I mean, that's how it's changed for me. How it's changed kind of more globally, I like to think it hasn't changed that much. Like, I still think that like Ordinaire it still has this like energy that is quite palpable. And I mean, obviously I'm a little, biased, but yeah, there's something about it that's quite special. And when I go back and see customers like really excited about the wines, and I see the staff really excited to be working there. Yeah, it gives me such a good feeling that people are still kind of like committed to like, this pretty abstract vision for what a business can do. It's pretty heartening.
Yeah, and I feel like its integration within the community is as solid as ever. And
Yeah.
I guess with the both maybe the sort of natural wine community and then producer community also. I mean, you still do like the Nouveau nights, which are like real beautiful,
Crazy.
real fun, crazy.
Yep.
But I guess that almost sounds like it's a maybe like some offshoot of when you realized producers could work a different way, like when people were starting, we could do a 0.0 keg for you. And
yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, the Nouveau was that was a lot of Quentin's idea and energy. I think maybe the first one I was slightly involved in, but he really pushed for that. But yeah, that is a little bit of a legacy of us trying to like push producers to like be a little more natty.
yeah.
And it's great. I mean, it's so fun to taste the wines when they're raw like that. And yeah, sometimes the producers taste the wines and they're like, "Oh, I'm just going to bottle this," you know? So some of them are like, "You can only drink this here. Don't advertise it. Don't show anyone," you know?
Yeah.
I won't say who's who, but yeah.
Yeah. No, it's cool to see some of the wines. I guess some of them it's maybe more of a preview of what it might be 2 years down the road, and some of them people are like, yeah, got this little parcel, 500 pounds to make the nouveau for this.
Yeah.
And then it's fun to see the different styles and what everybody kind of comes with, the sparkling or some like full blown reds or like what.
Yeah, it's great.
Just that mix. Like, you don't know what you're going to get necessarily when you're like looking at the board.
It's so Californian
like,
too. It's like when we do Nouveau, it's not like all Gamay. It's just like this huge rainbow of styles, and but all made with that like Beaujolais spirit.
Yeah.
So that translates, but with California material.
Yeah. It's real fun, and seems like it brings out like just a huge amount of the natural wine community.
Totally, yeah.
In the
People
Bay,
love it. Yeah.
See people from other shops and stuff, importers tasting there.
Yep.
It's like it's really cool. So,
yeah, it's a great event. Yeah, it's a fantastic event. I love it.
Do you want to talk about your dissertation?
I'll just maybe. I mean, it's I'll say. Do I want to talk about my dissertation? Yeah, I mean, my dissertation. So I write about early 20th century novels and poetry, mostly written in England. What to say about it? I mean, my original argument was that in modernism, aesthetic taste and literal taste sort of align, so that the act of eating becomes sort of an aesthetic act. That was my original argument. And I've been thinking about it for 12 years now. And, I took some time off, but it's always in my mind. I'm always reading. I'm passionate about that time of writing. And I've realized that doesn't happen, that there's not, that literal taste and aesthetic taste don't align. But that in modernism, like the tension between the two becomes sort of heightened. And that there's this sort of like material taste, this material element of taste puts pressure on these more abstract notions of beauty and disinterestedness. And so that's kind of what I'm writing about, is the tension between that sort of like disinterested appreciation of beauty and then the sort of like, I guess you'd call it a dialectical relationship with those forms of desire and self-preservation and eating that are all wrapped up in literal taste. That's kind of what I write about. And it informs how I think about wine a little bit, but not that much. When I first started, I was like, oh man, this is great. I'm going to be like writing about taste, and I'm going to be running a wine bar, and it's going to be this like grand unified project. And then I had kids, and I'm like, oh no, my life is like so fragmented. I can't keep it all together. Like things fall apart. And it's still that way. It still feels kind of fragmented.
Yeah.
I'm all over the place.
One of the reasons I brought it up is because I think I saw or I read something like, I think it was right when you were starting the dissertation, where you thought the shop might sort of be the
right
all encompassing version of the dissertation.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. I mean, in some ways it is. I mean, that's literal. I mean, I think about, I do think about the shop quite abstractly, and right. It's like, what are we doing? Like, what are we working for? Right. And there's different ways to describe it. For me, like something I always come back to when I'm thinking about food and wine is like, those are necessities for life.
Yeah.
Right. But the way Marx would say it is that right, what the human project, what history is the attempt to wrest a realm of freedom from the realm of necessity. And so I'm always thinking about that, like how in these really like basic relationships to necessity are we constantly thinking about how to be more free? Like how do we extract freedom from necessity? Not just for us, but for other people. So yeah, it informs how I think about, politics, but also, raising my kids or running a shop. It's like, yeah, how to realize that freedom. And yeah, so that, I mean, I write about that in my dissertation a little bit, but yeah, informs a lot of what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This next question, I guess it's another big,
Sure.
big one, but natural wine, whether sort of real natural wine or fake natural wine, it's kind of, it's obviously been
It's a growing sector.
a lot. Yeah, probably, especially on the sort of fake natural wine side,
Yeah.
or like clean wine
Yep.
side. But where do you think the future of it is, or like, where do you envision it going?
Yeah. Where do I envision it going? Well, where do I envision it going?
I guess an alternate question might be, where do you hope it goes?
Yeah. So I was about to reframe the question. Yeah, because I try to be optimistic when I'm thinking about what's going to happen. Yeah, I feel like, I don't know how you want to characterize the politics of natural wine, but it's kind of lefty. Well, I feel like the left has a bad tendency towards negativity when thinking about the future. And so I'm, which hasn't always been the case, right? That should be paired with, a utopian impulse, right? Rigorous criticism of existing conditions, but with a commitment to utopian possibilities. So I hope that it could take so many different forms. I take a lot of encouragement from drinking natural wine with people that are new to it, whether that's at Ordinaire, employees that are new or whatever. Not just at Ordinaire, but people that have started to work in the wine industry. Seeing their excitement when they drink a wine that's truly free.
Yeah.
And I guess for a while, I feel like natural wine set as its kind of like ethos, this sort of like educational project of telling people like where the wine came from. Like, this wine was farmed organically and it was made with native yeasts and not filtered, and there was like kind of this like, and all very necessary stuff. But I don't think people get into natural wine because of that. I think they get into natural wine because it makes them feel alive. And I think that's why the producers that we love make natural wine too. Right. They're committed to like environmental stewardship and organics and things like that. But I think that like what drives them is this sense of life that the wine carries. And I would like to see people like develop a vocabulary for talking about like why and how we drink these wines. Because I feel like conventional wine world kind of has that. We were talking about tasting notes before we started, but like the whole Sami thing, like, they're obsessed with like how wine tastes and service and all that stuff. And I feel like we've kind of seeded that ground in a lot of ways. And so I think, what makes natural wine special is the way, I mean, there's a lot of things, but that like intense feeling of life when you are sharing it with friends. Just like not losing that sense and trying to develop a more robust vocabulary for describing that sort of like culture of consumption and culture of taste around natural wine. Because it's very different than conventional and industrial wine. And I feel like sometimes we lack the ability to describe what's special about it. Even though we're very good at describing like how the wine is made and how that's different, but more about like how it tastes, how it makes you feel.
Is that like a return to the past, you think, of those old pre-prohibition tasting notes that we were talking about?
Maybe.
Or do you have any
I don't have
any
any,
kind of ideas floating around in your...
not really. Maybe it's not even learning to talk about it any better, but just being aware of it as like something that's unique and special and needs to be protected.
Okay.
Right? Because sometimes, you know, you hear people talk about like, we started bringing in this producer because now we can have natural wine in like every grocery store. Like more natural wine for more people is like what we're going for here. And I'm kind of just very suspicious of that because it so neatly aligns with like a growth mentality that I'm averse to. So not being distracted by those traps of the market, and instead like recoiling into like what makes it special and unique, right? Which is like, like how we drink it and what it means to share a bottle of natural wine with someone. Maybe just being aware that that's like something special that needs to be protected, and cultivated, right? And shared as an activity.
Yeah. I've heard some producers kind of, you know, recoil like a little bit or like draw back a little bit with the sort of that growth mentality where it's like, oh, we need more because it has to go to Wisconsin, it has to go to Florida, New York, like all these different markets.
Yeah. Well, people just got fucking burned by growth mentality when like this huge contraction, right?
Yeah.
And all the people that said they wanted to carry natural wine, all of a sudden they're like, oh, never mind. I actually don't want natural wine when it's not convenient for me. Right. So, but like so many importers and winemakers like took the bait and they're like, oh, we're going to triple production or bring in like 35 containers. And then all of a sudden demand dropped out. Right. Because I think the focus was they just got distracted by like the wrong things. And it happened. I'm not like Ordinaire and Diversey had similar things where we were like, oh, we need to buy like more wine, right? We need to have like these many value wines to like, you know what I mean? Like we weren't immune from that, you know? But yeah, you just learn, you know, to like learn from those mistakes and not let it happen again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough to, I guess you get caught up in that flow of commerce.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, it's good too to make money. You can like pay your staff much better.
Yeah.
And like, you know, it's not bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's easy to lose track of the thing that's important.
Is there anything we've kind of like glanced over or haven't touched on or anything that you'd like to talk about? Anything we kind of missed or anything?
Let me think. I mean, in terms of like other things that I hope for is, I hope more restaurants open that serve natural wine. I feel like, you know, there's places like Ruby and Ordinaire and Punchdown that have such fantastic wines, but like you can't sit down and eat food and drink them.
Yeah.
You know, we'll host bistro nights sometimes. And they're fantastic because we have this amazing cave and you can go and you can drink whatever 2012 Genevieve Perron Altesse, you know, with, you know, for really cheap with really good food, you know, that happens once every 2 months.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is like a huge missing piece in the Bay is like restaurants making simple food or complex food and serving. I mean, like Mijote is like the example. I mean, Snail Bar too, and they're, you know, they're much more limited in their capacity given their kitchen, but they do an amazing job with what they have. It's like fantastic. But like more places like that. Yeah. I mean, and I realize there's like there's economic and cultural reasons why restaurants aren't sprouting up all over the place. But I really hope they do, because I feel like that's such an important part of natural wine. It's like sitting at a table. You know, we talk about them as table wines,
Yeah.
but we drink them standing up outside on a sidewalk. I'm like, let's sit down and like drink this wine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope that, you know, I've thought about opening restaurants myself, and I'm just like, I just don't have the energy to do it. But I hope people do.
Yeah.
I'll be there to patronize them.
That's great.
Yeah, I don't know. Did we skip anything? I feel like I talked too much about myself.
Yeah,
But I
that's
guess
kind
that's
of
what
that's what you're here for.
Yeah, maybe that's, yeah. I mean, I hardly talked at all about Chicago, but I guess we're based in California, so it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything you'd like to discuss about the Chicago experience,
No, just, I mean, just,
I guess I have maybe one question about
yeah,
that.
Yeah.
I guess just the sort of cultural differences maybe around natural wine between the two places. I mean,
Yeah.
you have California, a lot of producers obviously based here.
I think that makes a huge difference.
And then
Yeah.
Chicago, I mean, Midwest. And
Yeah.
I'd love to hear some of the differences maybe that you've noticed, or how those
Yeah, I think that this
scenes
wine culture
change.
in California is more developed for obvious reasons. Yeah, just like drinking culture is very different. Like Chicago is like has just such an amazing bar situation. Like it's great. It's amazing, but you don't drink wine. Yeah. Yeah, I would just say natural wine is it's a little bit more of an uphill battle, just because I feel like the go-to in Chicago isn't wine. So you kind of have to fight the wine battle and then the natural wine battle on top of that. I mean, Diversey's lucky. We have like such an amazing community around us, and you know, tons of people are like get it. But there's fewer places, and I feel like it's like a harder place to sell natural wine. But there's amazing places that do it anyway. There's a place called Elska, which is a Michelin starred place. My friend Emily does the list there. It's as good as any list in California. It's amazing. Food's fantastic. And Mac, who's a good buddy who helped me open Diversey, opened up a distribution company called El Rancho, which brings in Percy and Scuola and Camille and some California producers. So he's really central in like Diversey wouldn't exist without El Rancho, getting those wines in.
Yeah.
So yeah, people, I mean, Cellar Door Provisions, obviously, and other places too. So yeah, I mean, I would just say the appetite is maybe not as voracious in Chicago.
Yeah.
But still there and growing. Yeah.
That's good. I mean, just more people getting into the wines and learning about them.
Yeah.
And experiencing them. I guess.
Yeah,
More
absolutely.
importantly. So.
Yeah, I think I can't think of anything we didn't cover. I mean, there's certainly many nuances to the history of Ordinaire that I left out, and tons of important characters that have been so important in just in how the shop's evolved over time. I mean, apart from the various, Quinn, Quentin, and Diego, but there was also this time like, yeah, it's hard to name all the people, but yeah, I mean, the staff now is just like so amazing. Daniel and Michelle and Diana and Daniel and Kevin and Matthias and Quentin, they're just like crushing. So I feel so lucky to have them there. And it's kind of funny whenever I get interviewed or when some like a journalist contacts us, I'm always the one that does this work.
Okay.
But I'm like, you guys have been working here longer than I have. Like, like I opened this place, but I think everyone that works at the shop now has worked there longer than me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, if you count me from like when we opened in 2013 to when I left in 2016, I think everyone's worked there more than 3 years.
Okay.
So it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
I mean, I've sort of never left, but
But that says something that you have those long-term employees.
yeah, absolutely. I feel lucky for that. And, we try to, I mean, I hope that it's a nice place to work. I tell the staff that like, I want them to be like paid well, but also to like, feel like the shop is an expression of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they take that seriously, and I think customers feel it.
Yeah.
So we do our like monthly field trip, and we drink a lot of wine together, which is great. Like they love drinking wine, which is sounds simple, but really important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
those field trips, did they just start as a way to just get people sort of meeting the producers in a different space, kind of?
it kind of started just in like really practical terms. We were closed every Monday or something like that, and the shop kind of needed to make more money, so I opened 7 days a week.
Mm.
And then I was like, man, we don't have any days off to hang as a staff, like which I realized we had been doing that when we were closed 1 day a week.
Okay.
And so then I was like, all right, we're gonna close once a month, and we're gonna all hang out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it just all of a sudden made a lot of sense, and we just decided to use it as a time to hang out and cook and learn more, visit producers, and
Nice.
and now it's like it's become institutionalized, so it's
Very cool.
Yeah,
It seems like you guys have
yeah
gone to some pretty amazing and foundational producers.
Definitely. Yeah. And I mean, the producers love it because, they, we try to we try to like do our best to like host them in their winery, so we'll bring lunch. We try to do it, if they have work to do, we try to help them. They inevitably end up having to like clean up a bunch of mess because we, party. But, I mean, it's like, it's an amazing, encountering winemakers in their home and in their workspace. Like, I mean, as you know, like you just learn so much more than reading on the internet or having them pour behind the bar, like encountering them in their native element. It's really fun. I'm really glad that kind of became a thing. So I hope more people do it. There's a couple other bars and restaurants that do the field trips too, and I feel like it's good. It's good policy.
Thanks for listening today. Ordinaire has long been one of the centers of the Bay Area natural wine scene. It's always a vibrant place with its own personality. Producers tend to congregate there, and events like Ordinaire help to spread the word of natural wine even more. You can find the shop at ordinairewine.com, or even better, in person at 3354 Grand Avenue in Oakland. Or follow the shop on Instagram at ordinaire_Oakland. And you can follow Diversey Wine at diverseywine.com or on Instagram at diverseywine. You can follow the podcast on wherever you're listening and the Instagram at Indie Wine Podcast. And feel free to email indiewinepodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or feedback. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd love it if you told a friend. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd love it if you told a friend or wine lover about it and help spread the word. Rating, reviewing, or donating at patreon.com/indiewinepodcast helps too. It all goes to offsetting podcast expenses like gas money, podcast hosting, research books, and websites, and allows for more episodes. We'll be back soon with another episode. Have a good one.